Good morning. Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. Welcome back to the PT Daily Show, PT on Ice, the only daily PT show out there on Facebook, on podcast, on Spotify. Thanks for checking us out so much. As usual, we appreciate it. It's Fitness Athlete Friday. I'm Mitch, coming to you live from the CrossFit gym, where I'm usually stationed. Monday through Friday, Saturdays, sometimes Sundays as well. And we're talking fitness athlete things today, and a lot of things on my mind because we just got back from an awesome course in New York. It was New York City, right in downtown Manhattan. A fantastic course, a great group of clinicians. I'll circle back around to that a little later, but a lot of great discussion, a lot of engaged clinicians really asking some really pertinent questions and gave us a chance to really share some case studies and case examples that were really helpful, I believe, for the participants of the course for the weekend. And so I had a lot that I was thinking about of which of those was kind of most pressing or worth sharing on the daily show today. And the one that comes to mind is really looking at lumbopelvic disassociation in CrossFit athletes. So that's really where I want to draw my attention this morning in the next few minutes or so, talking about athletes' ability and their lumbopelvic disassociation with movements associated with CrossFit. And what I see often, now we've covered the injury incidence data. We know that the overall injury incidence in CrossFit is on par with any other recreational sport. That's not what we're talking about. We still understand that things come up and things get irritable and things happen, right? And so low back tweaks are one of the most common areas that will plague a CrossFit athlete, right? And they'll maybe be a little extension intolerant or maybe a little flexion intolerant. We're doing a lot of squatting, a lot of compressive load on the spine. We're doing a lot of pulling from the floor, so some potential shear force on the spine. So we want to be conscious of that stuff and want to have a really well-tuned eye for looking at the lumbar spine or spinal stability as a whole and its ability to be dissociated with hip movement, because so much of what we do in CrossFit is looking at hip extension power, right? Triple extension, or using, like the deadlift, trying to pull through with our hips in that hinge pattern. So much of this is focused on the hips. I want to really make sure that we're not seeing what looks like hip extension or hip flexion moment and really actually occurring at the lumbar spine. And so two things that I see quite often is one thing really expressed in two movements really is athletes using their lumbar spine or using their erectors and pulling themselves into extension to falsely create hip extension moment. And I see this done in a couple different movements. One is rowing, right? Sitting on the rower, which seems very innocent, right? We're just kind of seated and pulling on the rower. And two is when we're pulling from the floor, pulling barbells from the floor, either the deadlift or the clean. Where athletes initiate that first pull off the floor by kicking their spine first into extension instead of driving with their legs. And those are the two that I want to hone in on this morning and kind of give you some things that I've been toying around with and playing with athletes and trying to get them to fix that lumbar dissociation a little bit and use their legs. The rowing thing, let's tackle that first. Rowing, when they return that chain back into its start position, they'll initiate by throwing their shoulders back first. And when you see an athlete come forward with the chain and then throw their shoulders back to initiate the movement, what you know they're not doing is driving off the plates with their feet. That should be like a leg press initiated movement on the rower and then finishing with leaning back and pulling to the sternum to get that last little bit of hip extension. What it shouldn't be is using the erectors or using the spine to kind of pull into extension to initiate that first chain pull. I know that's much easier to see visually if you're tuning in, but if you watch a lot of athletes from the side, when they're on that rower, they'll throw those shoulders back first, and that's your indication that, hey, you need to drive with those legs. Push off and use quads, use glutes, use hamstrings as really your force developer, which they should be, and the spine stays really strong and stable. And then at the end of the pull on the rower, they just lean back slightly and pull that rower into their chest. Why is this important? Because we do so much rowing in CrossFit, and we're talking about thousands of repetitions, right? We're talking about 20 to 30 strokes a minute, and we may be sitting on that rower for 2, 5, 10, 20 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, it's really important from just an overall cadence standpoint that they have a really efficient row technique, right? And just like running, when we're talking about thousands of steps, each step becomes really important. And just like in the same manner is true for rowing. So make sure that you're not seeing them throw their shoulders back to initiate the row and that they drive with their legs. The other one is looking at the barbell, and this is where I feel really we should have more focus, and really where we focus most in the course is putting barbells in clinicians' hands and then gathering the other clinicians around and saying, do you see what I see? Or what exactly do you see with this movement that doesn't look like it should? And what we're really trying to nail down there is when we're pulling a deadlift, say a conventional deadlift from the floor, or a clean, those shoulders are over the bar in the setup. I know it's hard to see with the camera. The shoulders are over the bar of the setup. You've got that forward torso angle. The hips are flexed, and you're at the start position with the barbell on the floor. Just like the row, that should be initiated with a leg drive. Chest and hips should rise together. So if you're seeing this arm angle, if you're watching the live video, you'll notice that the chest and hips come up at the same rate. If my elbow is to resemble my hips and the end of my hand is to resemble my shoulders, what I don't want to see is one kicking up before the other. What you'll see with an athlete who's using their back is just like the row, they'll start to stand that lift up right off the floor by throwing their shoulders back again. And so what they do is they initiate the pull by pulling with their back. One of the ways we go about kind of try to fix this is not cueing them to pull off the floor, but rather cueing them to push off the floor. If I can cue an athlete to push, I can get their chest and hips to rise at the same time, and they drive with their legs. That creates a really strong chassis. The spine stays really strong and stable, and they don't initiate by trying to kick into lumbar extension or leveraging their erectors to create that motion. I see this a bunch with athletes who maybe have a bunch of spine extensibility, right? They kind of kick into extension because that feels like a stable position for their spine. And so even though they can set up and they can show you a really flat back position to start, when they move, boom, their first movement kicks into extension off the floor. How do we combat this? Let's say we pick up on this and we're giving them the cues to drive with their legs or push with their legs off the floor. One of the old classics, right? Putting the PVC pipe on the back, right? And so it's got contact points from the cervical spine, the thoracic spine, and the sacrum, and just getting them comfortable in that hinge pattern of hinging all the way down to their setup and standing, hinging down to their setup and standing, getting them comfortable without extending their back. Taking that away, giving them a kettlebell in the front position and having them hinge and deadlift with that kettlebell, focusing solely on driving with the legs and not initiating the pull with the back. These two things can be super helpful, but if they don't quite get the job done, there's one piece of equipment that we have in the CrossFit gym that we're super fortunate to have, and I know that Dr. Zach Long just shared with you guys his free ebook, so if you haven't checked that download out, please go scoop that up. Free download of essential strength equipment for the modern physical therapist. Man, a question that we get often and a super, super useful resource. Go check that ebook out. But one piece of equipment that we have in the CrossFit gym that is super nice to have is the GHD machine, the Glute Ham Developer. This is the one where you hook your feet in and you lay your hips over the pad on the front of the machine, right? And what we're focusing on there is getting hip extension without lumbar extension out of that movement, right? And so what you'll see is the same fault reoccurring again with those athletes who pull early with their back. They'll try to pull with that hip extension by kicking into lumbar extension, right? And so now I can get that athlete in a forward unloaded position. Essentially their feet are hooked in parallel. It's so hard to do when I don't have visual for you guys. Their feet are hooked in parallel and they're laying their hips down to the ground. So now they're unloaded against gravity straight vertically with their torso. And now I can give them some tactile cues around the lumbar spine. They can put a hand on their belly and they can really start to initiate a really strong, solid, stable midline and focus on creating hip extension movement to lift their torso up against gravity into a parallel position and then back down, trying to mitigate all that drive or that willingness to want to kick into lumbar extension on that movement. So hopefully that makes sense. And if not, I'm going to shoot some videos and try to upload some resources so you guys can see exactly what we're talking about with that GHD machine. I love the GHD. It is big. It is a behemoth of a machine, right? But has a lot of uses when we're talking about midline stability, both on, when we're talking about the anterior midline, the posterior midline, when we're trying to develop glutes, hamstrings, all that stuff. Super, super nice piece of machinery, and it works really well as a nice little self-traction device as well. So athletes can kind of get a little traction when they hang on to that machine if they want to elongate that spine a little bit. So those are a couple things that I want you guys to focus on. Having a really well-tuned eye at lumbopelvic disassociation with your CrossFit athletes. Are they moving around the lumbar spine, or are they generating that movement around the hip like we want them to? And if we're seeing movement initiated at the lumbar spine, how can we better cue it out, help that athlete drive with their legs and keep the midline strong and stable, and then how can I drill it out, maybe tactile cues with the PVC pipe on the back, getting them on a GHD machine or somewhere where they can focus on creating hip extension without lumbar extension on board as well, with your tactile, verbal, and visual cues to kind of help guide them through that process. Be sure to take a look at the rower, make sure they're not doing that same, rewiring in that movement pattern over thousands of reps on the rower. If we can start to train that out on the rower, it'll transfer really, really well to the deadlift, the clean pulls, the snatches, etc. So those are a couple things that I'm toying with. And some things that might help you guys out in the clinic. Like I said, the course in New York City this past weekend was awesome. I was out there with Ryan Smith this weekend, right downtown Manhattan. How cool it was. We are so fortunate on behalf of the entire ICE staff. I can say unanimously, when we go out, the group of clinicians that we're surrounded with is world class, and we're so fortunate to get to meet you guys, engage with you all, grab dinner, drinks. We had a rooftop bar, the 20th floor, I think, rooftop bar, and we had the Empire State Building in the background. I mean, just world-class stuff, and being able to share a really great conversation with you guys. It's so great getting to meet you guys on the road, so we're super fortunate. The next time you can catch a Fitness Athlete live seminar course is going to be in the first weekend of June. That's June 2nd and 3rd, I believe, out in Connecticut. So we're hitting the upper East Coast, a little bit north of New York City. That'll be a super fun one. CrossFit gym, ready to rock and roll out in Danbury, Connecticut. So take a look. I'll be flying in the first weekend of June, so if you're in the upper East Coast region, look for us there. As always, so many courses going on, from spine management to extremity management to pain to thrust to you name it, they're going on. Check the website, ice.physio, at any time if you want to get plugged into a course and have a great weekend. So that's Fitness Athlete Friday. We're coming in shy of 15 minutes, which is good. You guys can get out there and crush your Friday and have yourself a wonderful weekend. Questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to hit me up, and we will see you guys next time on the PT on Ice Daily Show. Take care, guys.